Welcome back to You and Your Money. We're discussing healthcare this evening. My guest is Kevin Aaron. My details appear on the screen if you'd like to get hold of me. Kevin, so let's just talk about members in a smaller scheme, particularly the more elderly. What choices should they do? What should they be doing? I mean, I don't want to cause any run on any medical aids, but I'm concerned about their continuing cover. And then what happens? I mean, we've had schemes get into question previously, into problems. So, what do you say they should be doing?
Bryan, look, if you look at many of the smaller schemes, most of them are closed schemes, and they typically have very high solvency because they're closed. They're what's called restricted schemes. They're not open to the public, and they can protect their risk pool a lot better. But I think that people really need to be aware, and I come again back to the role of the broker. If people, whether they're young or they're older, have concerns, their broker should be proactively looking at them, looking at their requirements, looking at the health of the medical scheme, and advising before it's too late. You don't want a situation where a medical scheme runs into trouble, starts to go to market with very, very high contribution increases, and then you find, especially the elderly people, where it's not so easy to move because they've got chronic benefits. They've been with the medical scheme for a long time. They're concerned about possible underwriting issues, are now almost stuck. So like everything else, you've got to be aware. Make sure that you've got a very competent healthcare broker. Keep engaging that broker. It's the broker's responsibility also to ensure that they understand the health of the medical aid that their members are on. If they are concerned, then like everything, look at the market. There are a lot of medical schemes out there. Assess what you need, assess the benefits, and luckily you have the option to choose, especially if there's no break-in cover. One of the benefits of the Medical Schemes Act allows people to move from one medical scheme to another, and people should be really looking at the long-term sustainability of medical schemes.
Kevin, and if they do move, is there an obligation on that medical aid not to impose waiting periods and remove certain cover?
Bryan, so if there's no break-in cover, effectively 90-day cover, they can move without any imposition of underwriting. As long as they disclose a condition, they can move. Typically, these people actually are either being underwritten or they are chronic, but they are entitled to move from one medical scheme to another without being underwritten, as long as there's no effective break-in cover. So you can move.
Okay, Kevin, let's quickly talk about government. It's facing legal battles regarding NHR. I'm interested in your take on this. We don't have too much time. I do want to get to some emails. What do you think about what's happening with NHR and the legal issues?
Thanks, Bryan. I've said it before. I don't think that there's going to be an NHR for the foreseeable future, and I think the foreseeable future is at least the next 20 years. There are many legal challenges. I mean, recently the Board of Healthcare Funders won a case against the government, forcing the president to actually disclose the reasons why he promulgated the NHR bill, and he's now challenging that. I see last week another association called the Health Funders Association have come out instituting legal action against the government in respect of NHR. There's going to be so many legal challenges from all sorts of avenues. I think that people at the moment should not be worrying about the NHR. I think they should be rather worrying about their health, ensuring they're on the right medical aid and that they're getting the right benefits in terms of sustainability of cover.
Okay, Kevin, for younger members, obviously, they're not going for these comprehensive medical aids. So what's happened to cross-subsidization? Because you've got the lower members or the more healthy members, the younger members, paying lower contributions. You've got your high claimers. How are the companies dealing with cross-subsidization?
Cross-subsidization, Bryan, is a fundamental tenet of a medical scheme. It's really the core of a medical scheme where people are cross-subsidized, and that requires that medical schemes need to attract young and healthy members in, because often younger people tend to claim less than older people just naturally because of aging. So you need, for a medical scheme to be successful, it needs to attract young and healthy people. And that's the biggest challenge that all medical schemes are facing because of various factors such as prescribed minimum benefits, etc. It's easy for somebody at the moment to go join a basic health insurance plan, which might be half the cost of a medical aid. But when they have a real problem, a catastrophe, you actually find that the health insurance plan has a limit where medical aids will pay in full. I'm again on record, I've said it before, I'm really disappointed that the Council for Medical Schemes and the Department of Health have not yet approved low-cost benefit options, because this would allow us to attract younger and healthy people into medical schemes to enable that cross-subsidization. If medical schemes are not able to continue to attract young people, effectively the medical schemes will age, and as they age, the claims profile is going to go higher, claims are going to get more and more, and ultimately it means medical schemes become more expensive. And that's the biggest challenge that medical schemes are facing today, is how do we attract young and healthy people into a medical scheme, especially with the fact that the playing fields are not level, where you've got health insurance products that are not subject to PMB. You can go out into the market with something for 400 Rand, but a medical aid cannot offer a low-cost benefit option. Again, I will say to you that there are legal challenges. The Board of Healthcare Funders has legally challenged the CMS. It's on appeal, and we hope in the imminent future that sanity will prevail and that medical schemes will be allowed to compete with health insurance plans by offering low-cost benefit options for young and healthy people.
Kevin, why is there a delay? I mean, how difficult is it? I mean, I think about the programs I run, particularly on estate planning, and we talk about power of attorney, that it falls away. We don't have an enduring power of attorney. I can't understand, where are the bottlenecks? It seems so simple to get these power of attorney, low-cost medical aids. It just seems simple to get it through. Why the delay?
I have no idea, Bryan, because it's a no-brainer for me. It would ensure the sustainability of the medical scheme industry far more. It would help to attract young people in. It would reduce the cost of medical aid. I can only suspect that it's a political strategy that's linked to the implementation of the National Health Insurance.
Okay, let's go to some email. Janice asked me, is there an age limitation by medical aids when it comes to a possibility of a heart transplant or any other organ transplants? Are there any difference in terms of different medical aids providing this?
The simple answer, Bryan, is there's no age limitation. A medical aid is not allowed to discriminate based on age. If it's a PMB, it gets paid in full, irrespective of age, irrespective of what medical aid plan you are. If something is not a prescribed minimum benefit, it obviously would then be dependent on the rules of the medical scheme, whether typically there would be a limit. In short, if there's a clinical requirement for something like a heart transplant, medical aids would be required to pay for it, and there is no age limitation.
Okay, then Tony in East London says, do you think that gap cover is an essential financial tool for retirees? And why do the premiums on gap cover range from 300 to 900? Let me answer the 300 to 900. Obviously, it's gap cover, but they're gap cover with frills, and you've got to understand what is your gap cover covering. And obviously, if you're going to pay 300 Rand compared to someone else who's going to pay 900, you need to know something's not covered. But Kevin, gap cover essential?
Yes and no. More and more medical schemes, Bryan, are signing up specialists into specialist networks where the specialist rates are fixed and they're contracted. Typically, where gap cover is essential is that when you go into hospital, you'll know that gap cover really applies for in-hospital procedures, and it relates to the specialist. And it's often where the specialist is charging a higher tariff than what the medical aid pays, and the gap cover covers the gap. So it is essential because it could amount to a fair amount of money, but because many medical schemes have implemented substantial specialist networks that actually regulate what a specialist will charge. If you actually go to a network specialist, then you shouldn't really worry too much around the gap cover, because the medical scheme is going to pay it because there's a contractual arrangement. But I would say to your listeners, think carefully about gap cover. If you are going to have a hospital procedure, there could be a reasonable gap between what typically the specialist is charging and the medical aid is charging, especially if you're not seeing a contracted specialist in the medical scheme network, and that's when gap cover does become useful.
And Kevin, just before we go because we come to the end of the program, if you're in hospital, the hospital calls in the specialists depending on your ailment. And does the hospital consider whether that's a network specialist or not?
No, they don't. And I think that typically what happens, unless it's an emergency, typically most people actually would first go see a specialist, and the specialist would actually say, look, I need to do a particular procedure. And that's why it's very important that people consider that if they're on a medical scheme that's got networks in place, both specialist and hospital networks, that they really actually consider going into that channel. Because if you, first of all, I mentioned about the specialist, if you go to a specialist in the network, it's contracted. But second of all, if you end up in a hospital that's not on the network, the medical scheme, unless it's a PMB, is legally allowed to charge you a co-payment. So you also have to be very careful that you don't end up in a non-network hospital where you're going to be charged a co-payment. But again, gap cover to some degree does cover some of that sort of penalty. But the ideal is to consider seeing a specialist on the network. And if you need to go into hospital, you'll automatically be then referred into a hospital network. That's where the medical scheme has contracted better rates. They are monitoring that hospital, they're profiling them, and you then don't have out-of-pocket expenses for the consumer.
Okay, Kevin, I'm going to sneak in one more question, and I'm going to not do my closing this evening, so we've got time. There's nothing wrong with it. Doesn't mean a network hospital, a network doctor is inferior to any other professional that you may be using or hospital that you're going to.
Bryan, in fact, it's the opposite in my opinion, because GPs that are contracted onto a medical scheme network, specialists and hospitals, first of all, they contract with service level agreements, they are monitored, they are profiled, there's a commercial agreement, there's engagement between the medical scheme and these network specialists and hospitals, and it regulates how you operate, and typically there's a better price. So in no way is it inferior quality, not in any way. In fact, I would almost argue you're getting better quality because the process is being managed, controlled, profiled, and there's consequence management for poor outcomes.
Well, Kevin, thank you for joining this evening. I'm sorry we rushed it. I never got to any of the emails. It's important to note that our program tonight is to provide information and should not be construed as advice. Next week's program will focus on state planning, and if you need to get hold of me, my details appear on the screen. Kevin, thank you for joining me, and thank you to our viewers for watching. Good night.